Now, dear colleagues, I am delighted to introduce to you a distinguished scholar who doesn't really need an introduction in the field of organizational research, Barbara Czarniawska. She's a professor of management studies at the School of Business, Economics and Law at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. In her academic career, she has been an extremely creative and productive author and teacher. Her interest in the actual practices and interpretations of the activities of people acting in organizations and managing organizations has led her to interesting discussions of various theoretical strands. I think one of the characteristics of her work is that she has often challenged the mainstream of organizational theory at a given time. Let me just highlight a few of her most important books. In A Theory of Organizing, 2009, she demonstrates the shift in organizational theory from structures to processes, from organizations to organizing. The book offers a processual theory of organizing. Her book, with Thor Hernitz, on actor network theory in organization 2005, offers an interesting pathway to A&T from an organizational theory perspective. From a methodological point of view, I'd like to highlight two books. Her work on shadowing and other techniques for doing fieldwork in modern societies, 2007, is a helpful guide to do research on practices in organizations, for example. And certainly, Dr. Czarniawska's outstanding work on narratives and narrating in organization studies. Examples are Narrating the Organization, 1997, Narratives in Social Science Research, 2004, or Narratives We Organize By, which he has edited with Pascal Gagliardi in 2003. In our discourse in organizational education, Dr. Czarniawska's work on global ideas, how ideas, objects, and practices travel in the global economy, has been used by various authors. Particularly, the notion of traveling ideas was quite successful in our small community. I think particularly about our colleagues in Marburg. In the last few years, we find thought-provoking works on cyber factories, how news agencies produce news. And on a less serious note, given the sometimes precarious public funding of higher education, there is one title of Barbara's book chapters that stands out and I found particularly promising. It reads, "Help, we have too much money." Starting from the observation that many organizations seem to have too much money at the end of the budgetary year. By that, be that as it may, we have among us today not only an academic who understands to challenge the status quo of her field, but also a widely recognized scholar. Dr. Czarniawska holds a PhD in economic sciences from Warsaw University, from Warsaw School of Economics. She holds various doctorates honoris causa from Stockholm School of Economics, Copenhagen Business School, Helsinki School of Economics. She's a member of the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences, the Swedish Royal Engineering Academy, the Royal Society of Arts and Sciences in Gothenburg, and she has won numerous awards for her academic work. So Barbara, we are honored to have you with us, and we're very much looking forward to your lecture, so please.
Good morning, everybody. I must say that I feel truly honored to have been invited here. And also, it's a great pleasure. I'm very happy that you are willing or maybe not willing, at least you promised to listen to me and share my thoughts with me. Although we don't have to agree on everything, and I have to apologize because I just discovered that I'm going to disagree with the rector to begin with, but I swear I didn't know what he was going to say in his introduction. So again, forgive me for that. Yeah. By the way, Starbuck here, it's not the Starbuck that your rector was referring to, okay? This is, I mean, the Starbuck atmosphere, he meant the Starbuck cafes. Here is, I'm quoting William Starbuck, who is a very well-known organization theorist. It's sort of funny that they come together, but you know, I don't know what they have to do with one another. Because I like the definition. I mean, he sort of went and checked what the word means actually, or what it used to mean. And he discovered that the word derives from the ancient Indo-European root that has to do both ergon, that is in Greek work, and organ, like in both an organ of on which one plays and an organ of the body. So, as he says, the Roman verb, organizzare, initially meant to furnish with organs so as to create a complete human being, which I think is quite interesting. But then the Romans redefined it, maybe here in Porta Nigra, I was thinking about it, and redefined it as to endo with a coordinated structure. And from Latin, it's traveled into Old French, and then already in 1488, the French language included the word organisation, and this was defined as the state of an organized body. Observe this interesting sort of double meaning of a body, which will be sort of haunting us until now. And Starbuck says that actually this was the sort of the idea that organization is a state of an orderly and sort of a property of societies that are being organized. It has been used already, like in 17th, 18th century, and in 19th century it became obvious, more or less. So a question would be, what do you mean by organizations now? And what I think it is, that to reflect upon it and to sort of decide what we want to mean when we use that word, we should go back, because only in that way we will be able to go forward. And I think that when going back, one important thing, and here I'm going to disagree with your words again, is to get rid of open system theory. Mind you, I used to be in the 70s, I was absolutely for the open system theory. I was the one who introduced the famous book on social psychology of organizing by Katz and Kahn into Polish, and I thought this is going to be no end. I mean, the best theorization of what is happening in organization ever existed. Well, that was long before I discovered Luhmann, but that's another story. But what I think is not that they were wrong in any way, but I like this sort of quote from Leontine, where he says, what is a necessary step in the construction of knowledge at one moment becomes an impediment at another. So, yeah, I think that the open system theory is now more a problem than a solution, because it sort of introduced a vocabulary that is keeping us imprisoned in a certain way of looking at the world. So, you know, what was absolutely necessary in the 60s to sort of to apply system theory, which has nothing to do with organizations originally, to introduce this idea that they exist separate units which are divided exactly by boundaries from the environment, and which they are doing the best as much as they can to adapt to the environment. But nowadays, what we have noticed, or we're forced to notice, is that the environment is not a kind of pre-existing set of problems to which an organism or an organization must find solutions, because those organisms or organizations created those problems in the first place very often. Also, and that has been observed by many organization theories, that the environment of organisms, of course, consists largely of other organisms, but also the environment of organizations consists almost entirely of other organizations. So it's a very sort of a peculiar distinction between an organization which is not an environment, because environment is again the same thing. And therefore, at least what I think, is that the notion of adaptation is misleading as a sort of way of understanding the connections between the organism and its environment, or at least a formal organization and its environment. And again, although of course it can be claimed that organisms have boundaries that separate them from their environments, as many times said, sort of the human organism is not the same as a communication system. But in formal organization that we study, there are things which are very common, and these are mergers and acquisitions. Actually, I think this is just a digression, because the previous talk I gave was about university and fashions, and I think mergers and acquisitions, a new fashion in the universities. Don't know whether it came to Germany yet, but we can see them, yes. They are transnationals, and they are networks of interest to you. So the idea of sort of pre-existing and solid borders becomes a bit tenuous, to say the least. So what are organizations? And here again, as you remember, I said going back is necessary in order to go forward. So I went to the classic, that is Margent Simon book, Organizations, and discovered something quite interesting, I thought. That in the original version from 1958, they say basically there is no point of defining organizations. This book is about the theory of formal organizations. It is easier and probably more useful to give examples of formal organizations than to define the term. And then they give examples of the organizations. And they end, we are dealing with empirical phenomena, and the world has an uncomfortable way of not permitting itself to be fitted into clean classifications. So that was good in 58, but then they soon discovered that it was not enough, because everybody was actually defining organizations. So in the version from 1993, they do define organizations, and they say organizations are systems of coordinated action among individuals and groups whose preferences, information, interests, or knowledge differ. In my opinion, it was a bit too late, because organization theory is doing very well, and organization was seen as systems of mechanical or organic parts, in which people were either cogs, if it was the mechanical version, or body parts, heads, hands, what have you. Nowadays they're supposed to be hearts as well. So what I think is that organization theories themselves help to ratify organizations. And that we now, I'm not speaking about you because you're young and you're not guilty of anything yet, but at least my generation, we sort of were building in Golem, and you know how the story of Golem ended, not well. So what I think is that studying organizations as those separate entities with borders can obscure important and nowadays very visible instances of organizing. Because there is organizing without organizations. Because there is organizing between organizations. And because there is organizing in spite of organizations. Therefore, my somewhat provocative title, Organizations, Obstacle to Organizing. Well, organization without organizing now in terms of internet, web, and Facebook, Twitter, and what have you is obvious. You can organize anything now without any need for a formal organization. According to Gunther Grasses, you know, you can even organize a murder at a distance using the internet. Here I'm quoting the sort of a bestseller from 2008. It's already old by Clay Shirk. Here comes everybody. And okay, he was a bit. It was a time really of internet hype, and he was very optimistic. But what he was pointing out is sort of an important area of where this organizing is happening. He says that the web permits exchange of information by blogging, for example, collaboration. I'm sorry. You were fond of Wikipedia, okay? Or you're not fond of Wikipedia. It allows mass action, political protests, and of course the football matches. And it allows infiltration of formal organizations, as we know from hacking and all this that is happening. So I do think that he had quite an important point. And another example is organizing between organizations. Forgive me for advertising my own work, my own book, but for quite a while I was very interested in city management, because it almost sounds like oxymoron, like contradiction in terms, but it certainly is taking place. But I think that it should be seen and conceived as a kind of very complex and quite disorderly action net. It's a web of inter-organizational networks where the city administration and the city president or burgomaster or whatever is just one place, one person, one site, just one point of entry for those who studied, and by no means provides a map of the entire terrain. City administration is, of course, a very important and big organization, but by themselves, they wouldn't be able to do much. And then there is organizing in spite of organizations, when organizations simply do not work. And I'm quite fond of this sort of old definition by Charles Perrault, when he said that we should be treating organizations as tools, indeed. Or, like Lamoureux said that it's a formal organization can be seen or should be seen as a machine that was given a legal personality. Yeah, and that's interesting, and in that sense, this legal personality have borders and things like that. But humans are not cogs in this machine. They construct those machines, but once constructed, the machine is constructing them as well. So if you take such a perspective, the organization is a tool like any other, so it may work, it may not work. Because the point is that if it doesn't work, it should be repaired or exchanged or dropped, as Karl Weick used to say. And also, organization can be designed for better or worse, but they never can be designed perfectly. And here, small digression, because I think it's a very useful sort of insight at Hélène Carré about why it is impossible to design anything perfectly. Because, she says, the art of reciprocation is always bigger than the art of projection. I mean, when the designer is projecting an idea into a kind of object, she or he will have some ideas in how it should be used. But the users have their own ideas, and they may not be using the objects at all in the way the designer thought about it, or else they will be using it in many other things that the designer never thought about. Not to forget the fact that the designers don't themselves realize how much the institutional order in which they live is sort of inbuilt into them. So they are designing things, properties of objects that they never thought about. My somewhat silly, but I think it's interesting example is, if we make an analogy between an organization and a computer, is a list of things how computers can be used in workplaces. You know, elements of decoration, surfaces on which to place decorative elements, notice boards outside and inside. I don't know about you, but I have all those, you know, put on things on my computer. Communication devices, graphic cards, all this stuff very long. My favorite is the last one because I didn't try it yet. Beds for growing grass on other people's keyboards. Apparently, if they are dirty enough, you really could put seed in between the letters and they will grow. I don't recommend it. I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm sure that nobody who was designing a keyboard was thinking about it as a place, as a bed for growing grass. So this is how it goes with computers and with organizations. Many things can be done with that. So what should we do? What is to be done? I think that one idea is to sort of break this clay golem into pieces by studying organizing rather than organizations. Of course, I'm not saying that this reification of organizations is all the fault of organization theorists. I think actually it's the practitioners who reified the concept because it suited their political purposes. It's much easier for them to speak about organizations and sites and borders and things like that. But the point is, you would have to take over their point of view, not necessarily. And I think that it's important that we don't take the, you know, reification is an interesting thing to study, but we don't have to join them in doing that. So, what to do? As I said before, first go back to go forward. There were, under the time, quite a few other ideas of organization than as those systems with the input, output, output, things like that. Garbage can, at a certain point, not the least, I mean, garbage can was conceived of in the context of university, in the context of educational organization, actually. So maybe we fit it this kind of a definition better than anybody else. But at any rate, I think it's very useful and very interesting. So, but when Science and Marsh wrote about it first in '63, they were speaking already about organization as sort of coalitions of multiple and conflicting interests. So you don't need to see for borders to look at that organization from outside. I mean, there are borders if you want to see them inside, lots of them. And then together, Cohen Marshall also produced this famous article, The Garbage Can Model of Organizational Choice. And again, they were speaking about decision-making in organized anarchies. Now, as you know, sort of the fashion on considering anarchies is back, and James C. Scott is very famous for that. I recommend the double cheer for anarchy. Maybe nowadays in the political situation the cheer was a bit too early, but at any rate it is interesting. So they were speaking about organization where preferences are problematic, the technology is unclear, and participation in decision-making is fluid. So what they said simply is that what happens is that at a given time there is a set of accessible problems, a set of solutions, a set of decision-making opportunities, and a set of participants, and all of them meet randomly and then give a sort of splendid name of decision-making for what happened, just, you know, because somebody was in the room, and because somebody read some book, and because somebody had a cousin that is working in somebody else, and they just told them how it is. Yeah, and here we have this fantastic rational choice of decision. I'm getting too excited about that. No? We'll leave the decision making. So what to do? Go back to, that's what Karl Weick wrote his book, The Social Psychology of Organizing, exactly as a sort of answer to Katz and Kapp, The Social Psychology of Organizations. And he was saying then, in 1979, that it is much more important to look at the process of organizing or a process of assembling ongoing interdependent actions into sensible sequences that generate sensible outcomes. You hear the sensible, it's a sort of three-step for his sense-making. I mean, sort of, to do something sensible, you must make sense of a great many things that don't. And then he says the result of organizing is interlocked cycles, which can be represented as causal loops, rather than as a linear chain of causes and effects. And organizing is an ongoing encounter with ambiguity, ambivalence, and equivocality. And it is a part of a larger attempt to make sense of life and the world. And more recently, what we have is at our disposal is actor network theory. Bruno Latour went courses with Algirdas Bremas in narratology and decided that it can be of service to understanding how the social is being assembled. So, according to this narratological recipe, it's not good to speak about actors and characters from the very beginning of a tale because we don't know, but we see actants, as Bremas called them, something that acts, or something that is acted upon. And it can be a person, it can be an animal, it can be an object. It's only when we watch their narrative trajectories, what they want to achieve, what they are doing, then we see that some actors become actors. They acquire character. They can become heroes or villains, something, but that we don't know because if we knew it from the beginning, we would never read the tale. So, what the secret seems to be of those who not only become actors but even macro actors is that they are very good at connections. They are connected. They are sort of assembling others and stabilize, and they make association and they stabilize them and they present themselves as one actor speaking with one voice and therefore very powerful. Well, I think it's very useful to most of our interest, but because it came in the studies of science and technology, and they had their own sort of goal to establish why certain theories and certain, why certain groups of actors became macro actors and now that. So they didn't watch other cases of organizing which could be interesting to us. That is, when they fail to become macro actors. And this is sort of funny because I'm trying to convince constantly some of my students to study failures. But, it's very difficult to study failures because, of course, nobody wants to admit it. So the best you can do is go to retired people but then the retired people have their own bitterness, catalog, so you don't know what they are describing as it was or just getting the revenge. Very difficult, it's much easier to study success because, of course, everybody is responsible for success and everybody is happy to say how it was. And also, in many cases that I studied, there is not a goal of becoming a macro actor. There is a goal, believe it or not, sometimes want to do something sensible, and they do it. And they don't care whether they're perceived as a macro actor or whatever. I know, it's very rare, but it does happen, believe me. So I think there are quite a few things and quite a few ways of looking at organizing that can be useful. I myself, I will do it quickly. I believe in studying action nets, where the sort of organizing is understood as connecting, reconnecting, disconnecting various collective actions to one another. And sometimes, very often, it is done according to patterns that are dictated by the given institutional order, but sometimes also it could be very innovative. And those action nets can be constructed within organization, between organization, and outside of organizations. And the actions can be connected loosely, temporarily, or in a stable manner. But yeah, that's my way of looking at it. There are still problems. It's not so easy, because I think there is a very persisting imagery behind organizations as buildings. Buildings must be structures, and they have to have walls and therefore borders. It's interesting, in Italian it's the same word. I mean, the struttura is a building, so it's very difficult to say that it can be a structure which doesn't have a physical form. And I suspect that this comes from sort of beginning of organization studies, where mostly what was studied were factories, and factories did have a very visible building, and everybody knew where the factory was. It was clear spatial location. One could say also that the idea of buildings and separation borders, that especially in our times give a shelter, from this horrible, threatening world. But as you well know better than me, that formal organizations do not shelter really anymore, because of the precariat, because of outsourcing, and because of all the security problems. Actually, I have a small project with my friend Sabina Siebert from Glasgow. It started in our interest in spies, as a sort of this is a kind of a profession that is not studied enough, we think. So we looked at the sort of the distrust devices used by the spies, and we started believing, like everybody else, that the major idea of a functioning organization that must be built on trust. And then we felt that the spy organizations are built on distrust, but then we discovered that those devices are all present in our very trustful organization. There are cameras, there are codes, there are, so it's a mixture of trust and distrust and bond. In general, I think that the sort of the metaphor of the building is very often used as an unconscious frame, and in this use it's quite misleading. So I have some postulates, and you will tell me what you think about it. One thing is I do prefer to use organization in singular and as the state of being organized. And I'm being a bit tired with organizations in the sense that why don't give them proper names? They are different. They are companies and they are universities and they are administrations and they are, whatever. Why public schools and private schools? Why don't they give them names rather than speaking in general on organizations? There are no general organizations. And then I think what happens very often, at least to my doctoral students, they mix up processes of organizing with sites where those are taking place. So they have a case of Volvo. So I say, okay, has Volvo got sick or what is the case of Volvo? And then they say, it's put on Freud, but very unjustly, because Freud was never speaking about the case of Anna B, whatever. He was speaking about a case of hysteria, or a case of neurological processes, and so on and so forth. So it was not the case of a person, it was a case of a sickness. And we were studying cases of mergers, acquisition, whatever. And Volvo is a place and not a case for study. And then I think also that we'll notice that there is ongoing lots of organizing that we don't study and don't pay attention to. Like we are being organized as consumers and managed, patients are being organized and managed, and of course students. So why not study that rather than study the organizations? And as to borders, yeah, but they do exist, but they are constantly made and remade. So I think that we should be careful not to contribute to making them, at least when it's not our aim to do so. But that's a problem. I mean, again, I don't want to exaggerate the performativity of organization theory, but in case we are relevant, in case we have impact, we have to be thinking about what are we sort of stabilizing and verifying by saying what we do. So, at the end, I have I want to present an idea which I thought could be of interest to you considering your interests. Namely, the idea of trading zones. I'm quoting here the paper by Collins, Evans and Goldman, but they got it from Peter Gallison, who is a very well-known STS researcher, but they used it, I think, in a quite interesting way. What they say is, we define trading zones as locations in which communities with deep problems of communication manage to communicate. I mean, if they read the Luhmann, they would say that practically all communications, communities or systems of communications have problems with communicating with one another. But what they say, if there is no problem of communication, there is simply trade, not a trading zone. But in trading zone, those people, and not only when speaking different languages and having different messages and communicating different ways, meet. And they made this sort of a model here, where they say it's like that. It could be a spontaneous collaboration, or it could be coercion. That's why they are into the trading zones and they start or attempt to trade. And the communities that meet can be homogeneous or heterogeneous. And they have examples. I mean, not all of them will be sort of directly relevant, but they're quite interesting. So what do? What they say, like in this homogeneous collaboration, they try to construct an interlanguage. It could be jargon, it could be pidgin, it could be Creole. They say, for example, that biochemistry, where biology has to talk to chemistry, or the neuroscience, nanoscience, when they sort of different communities, scientific communities have to sort of want to speak to one another, so they try to produce a language that everybody can understand, at least during the meeting. You probably know the work of Richard Rothenburg, the German anthropologist, who was saying that, in order to get along in this sort of meeting between different communities, we have to pretend that we have one common language. Then we translate it in our way when we go back to our home community, but when we meet, we try to pretend that we understand what we're speaking about. Then the fractionated, when the cultures or communities are very different, we're speaking about those that use boundary objects, but they can't really come with a common language, so they at least give objects of various kinds, and they sort of, so that's zoology, the famous in boundary object study. Or they're speaking, well, that's what they're very fond of, and that could be also interesting, interactional expertise. So they're speaking about such professions like interpreters, or about our peer review, where we sort of pretend that we understand what the other people are saying and even have opinions on it. And then there are those which they are called subversive. I mean, they are giving McDonald's, but it could be, no, I should be offending Starbucks again. No, McDonald's in the sense how McDonald's enforced on many other societies, communities and culture, the idea of the American fast food, without anybody much protesting. And then, you know, being STS scholars, they are presenting the conflict between Einstein and Newton and how it is, and I'm not going to go into that. And finally, sort of the coercive and enforced communication and trading zones, and of course the horrible historical example is galley slaves, but the positive example that they do is the use of AZT, which is zidovudine, to treat AIDS. Because apparently, I didn't know that before I read the paper, in South Africa, some of the most crazy idea was that the people with AIDS should be eating healthy diet, and therefore they will be healthy. And instead, I mean, there was that, oh, you agree, I can see, it's, don't you believe them? But the idea of forcing the sick people to take the medicine, they consider as a very good example. But at any rate, I do think that it's an interesting idea, trading zones, because you don't have to bother about what is an organization, where does it start and where does it end, where is the border, how visible it is or it's not. But you know, what is taken for granted is that different communication systems, different communities, different cultures, what have you, cannot naturally communicate. But they can try, and they can try exactly in this kind of trading zone. But it's okay, this was, yeah, my suggestion to you, and you take it or you drop it. Thank you very
so much. We have about 10 minutes for questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely, I'm going to go 15, sorry, I was
No, and we can also do 15. We have a break afterwards. So, do you have any questions, comments?
Yeah, thank you very much for this very inspiring lecture. I totally understand your vote for looking more on the processing side and the dynamics than for the structure. But I'm not sure if I understood you right. Do you completely want to go away from looking at the structure and looking at orders? For example, I mentioned the problem of membership, the problem of identity. What we can see at merging processes, for example, that in fact there are collective identities of two separate organizations and their members, which bring problems sometimes for many years until there is a kind of opening of both sides to come together. So what do you say about these phenomena?
Yeah, at least, I mean, I will divide it into two parts because my answer is a bit different. At the beginning, processes of structures. I have nothing against studying structures, but what I would suggest is that while studying processes, you can discover structures, and then you will see how they are actually. Because, you know, it's all my own, like, sins of my youth, because this is how we started. We had the organizational structure on the paper, And then we went there and nobody in the actual organization knew what we were speaking about, even if they had the same image and say, oh yeah, but that was, before this new director came. So no, it's basically like that. But but we know this and this doesn't exist and this is not exactly, and so on and so forth. So we discovered that this was a kind of a presentation device more than anything else. But there are structures in the sense of the repeated sort of elements of processes, but I think that they should be discovered rather than taking as a starting point. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now about identity, but that's another of my things. Living in Sweden, I now do in Sweden 35 years, I still sometimes can be very, very surprised. And a sociologist wrote in one of the Swedish media where he was discussing something, and he said, well, nobody wants to be different, do they? I thought, excuse me? I mean, all my youth I tried to be different. Everybody in Poland tried to be different. Okay, that they then became almost identical, that's another thing, there are not so many things, but the very sort of the cultural idea of what is more important, identity or alterity? Not alterity of the other, but alterity of myself. And this is what I remember from my original sort of, psychology. A self, or rather I would say sociology. A self is always combined of identity and alterity. And alterity comes first, because you realize that you exist first when you understand that you are not part of your mother. So the difference is, to use the Deleuze things, it's not the same. The sameness comes later than the difference. So, and I think that goes for organizations as well. I mean, it's only that we live in times, as Boruma says, the terror of identity. Everybody's identity is what we have, or some other stupid people have. But alterity is something that only very strange, exotic people have. No. They are always together, and so when I speak about organizations, I speak about organizational image. And this is what you're speaking about. They can have, like we have an idea of the self, they have an image of what the organization is. But what I think is very important, it's always composed of that we are like them, but we are unlike those others. Yeah. Mm. So in that sense, yes, it can be an image that is sort of that survived its own life, that's true. But this is an interesting thing to study as well. It was quite a bit, but for a moment there was a fashion in sociology study reputation, and this is what they discovered, because that's very close, of course, to that the famous universities were famous on the basis how they were 25 years ago, actually, but doing a good representation work, they managed to sort of propagate that image as such, and in the meantime, God knows what happened, but but the image exists.
Thank you very much, very interesting presentation. I'm just still thinking about the trading zone concept you're offering, and I'm just reflecting on what does it mean to use the term of trading zone. Maybe we can come closer to this a little bit more. Because, we have had in the past the concept of kind of like bargaining, or that we have the contested terrain, organizing organizations, contested terrain. I think that's why I've been in touch with concepts like this, or to understand, maybe what is the element of the disciplinary thought when talking about trading. And I mean, that's a term of economy, and of kind of like, of course, you could see it as an anthropological term, of course, as well. It's a very traditional, unique, or universal dimension that giving and taking is something happening all over the world. But still, reflecting on a political term would be the agora, for example. And then you would have a completely different perspective on organizing as kind of like that there is something on organizational democracy or an overcoming, and as well as a political conceptualization here. And now you offer an economical one.
No, I do think it comes from anthropology. And what I think is very important in this, they say here that if there is no problem of communication, there is simply trade, not a trading zone. okay, you can believe them or not, in the sort of subtlety of the language. But I think the problem with bargaining with the sect, well, on Agora they all spoke Greek, right? And in bargaining and in economics, there is this idea that there is a correct language that correctly represents reality as it is. I mean, this is this sits in philosophy and everywhere place, and people could die for that. But what they are saying, and this is, like, I'm sorry, there are different languages, and what we normally do is that my language is the correct one and the other guys are idiots, so that solves the problem. But they're saying, admit it, nowadays in the global world everybody is meeting with everybody else, and there are lots of different languages, or no languages at all. I mean, speaking about anthropology, this poor guy that was trying to convert this isolated Iceland, and they simply killed him, That's, so what I think, I'm not sure, I'm not a native English speaker, but I think they want to introduce a concept that has not been used before, and therefore is not grounded in this idea that there must be one correct language. And if we learn it, and of course the economists believe that their language is the only correct one, but if we all learn it, then we will communicate with no problems whatsoever. So that's the idea. If there is a better term, sure, but...
Translation, I mean...
Sorry?
Translation, I mean, we have a strong debate on translation, isn't it? Or the ANT...
Yeah, but this is what they say, that it's only one example of that trade exhaust. They quote interpreters, yes.
Oh, okay. So, trading...
and again, in translation, one of my favorite topics, as a translator, by the way, I am a professional translator too. I translated. I don't ask. I just translated Weick's sense-making into Polish. I didn't ask Weick whether I did it correctly. I translated it as I saw fit. So that's not really communication in that sense.
Are there any other questions, remarks, comments?
I just would be interested because you mentioned Luhmann twice, I think, but you didn't talk about it. So I just, if you could just give us a small picture of what about narratives and different things. So are they somehow interconnected? Are they counterparts, or where would you put the puzzle together? Are these two completely different?
If I may, can I
repeat the question? Couldn't hear the question, sorry.
It was a question about Luhmann. I was mentioning Luhmann without saying much.
I have one question to that relates to it. So when we were talking about when we study processes, we are able to also, let's say, identify structures. What is it that constitutes a structure then? Is it like Luhmann proposes? Does it have anything to do with decision making, with premises that kind of shape decisions, or what would you say is a core element of what you would accept as a structure?
I would define it myself, sorry. But, no, I mean, in decision making, I really agree with Jim March that decisions happen. But on the other hand, I do agree with Luhmann too. It's that we do something which we call making decisions. It's wrong, it's far from the rational choice model, but still we do something, and it's quite interesting to study it, and why it's called like that, and what are the results. But that's to Luhmann. I mean, it's funny. You probably mentioned it also. Apart from the fact that I really adore his writings, and especially those in latest translations, because the latest translator is a professor of literature at Stanford, so he is able to translate, so that you don't have to think about what really Luhmann meant. I mean, I think it's very good. But because a colleague of mine right now from the pedagogic, as they call themselves still, department at my university, and communication systems, and connecting it to the wide problem of relevance of educational research. So what he's asking is sort of like, if you guys say something to politicians, do they understand at all what you are saying? Or is it a situation that, you know, both sister communication systems are autopoietic, and as to quote Maturana and Varela, as frog sees only that the froggy brain permits her to see, so do politicians see in the educational research anything, only what they want to see? Or is it the possibility, is it the possibility of a trading zone? Is there a possibility to sort of, you know, to communicate at any rate? So I think it's quite interesting. My colleague is still fighting with that. There will be some conference, I mean, I think director in Toronto, I think, on the educational research. So he's going to have a track on that. So I think it will be quite interesting, because in a sense, I mean, if you take it to the sort of dramatic end, so even the systems, communication systems, are autopoietic and will not be able ever to communicate, only to irritate one another slightly. What we are doing in education? Sorry, that was too much.
We have one more question, then we will have to close the session.
Paul Reinbacher, University of Education, Upper Austria. I would like to take up this last point because I've got a question concerning what you mentioned about and told us about reification, the dangers of reification.
I can't hear you.
Isn't the danger of reification not only, not also given with the concept of trading zones? If you look at the communities, which also bear the danger of reification? Don't we need sort of an epistemic turn also in organization studies to accept statics and dynamics, organizing and organization and so on as two sides of the coin? Or in terms of Spencer Brown, as two sides of one distinction, and we can cross between this distinction and take up the dangers of oscillation between?
Yeah, but that's, I think it's historically a problem, that when some kind of formulation and vocabulary becomes fashionable, then it starts being treated as if it was exactly this correct representation of reality as it is. Or, to put it less elegantly, when we get used to some concept that we like, then we stick to them. So yes, of course there is a danger with that, but that's the point sort of a new, sometimes of the old concept that are being given a new life, and sometimes of a new concept, not to get stuck in that has been, and we started treating as something that is, you know, real in this sort of correct representation. Yeah, so, you know, I also think that it's not that I'm thinking that here they sort of solved all the problems and landed on the moon. It's just a possibility. It's a concept that can irritate a bit the previous concept as it is. And I was thinking about it. I don't do anything about it. I was just thinking about it when reading the program of your conference, and thought that, you know, maybe it would be interesting. Nothing more.
Thank you very much.